Hi, this is Kirk Harbinger, and I'm here with Bethany Gonyea. She's the founder of Numinous and the Albany Peace Project. So this is the third video in a series of 4 that we are putting out in January, each Sunday of January, talking about different topics. And in this session we'll talk about more about coherence, as well as the other side of that, which is incoherence, and how they both affect our bodies, our minds, and then obviously everything around us too. So before we get started, Bethany, I'd just like to have you expand a little bit on the purpose of Numinous, and then of course the Albany Peace Project.
Well, hopefully if people have been participating all month long, you've been seeing all these different speakers or different meditation leaders. Many of them have been speakers at Numinous because the goal of Numinous is to provide these skills to as many people as possible. So. Okay,
that's great. And then the Albany Peace Project is, what kind of effort is that?
Well, you know, when you learn these skills and you get skilled at them, you just automatically want to kind of do something bigger with them, make a difference. And so the Albany Peace Project is an opportunity for us to not just kind of learn these skills for ourselves, but to see if we can actually have a positive societal impact. And we're certainly looking forward to crunching the numbers and see how that goes.
Getting results, that's great. So today what we're going to do is talk about coherence, but let's start off by exploring what incoherence really looks like.
You know, really a good question, because a lot of times we know something a little bit more when we understand its opposite. And so a few symptoms of incoherence would be what they call monkey mind, right? That racing mind where your mind jumps from here to there, and so there's monkey mind. Also, what happens in incoherence, when we're incoherent, is we may have mood swings. Like all of a sudden you kind of find yourself down in the dumps and you have no idea why. Well, the more we practice these skills that we learn at Numinous and the Albany Peace Project, the more we can kind of trace back and to see where we started to become incoherent, and we're able to turn ourselves around much more quickly. The other thing that happens when we're incoherent is we think negative, depressive, limiting thoughts, right? So basically, anytime we're in a depression, it's because we're in like a dead-end cul-de-sac in our mind, that we're thinking closed-ended, closed-circuit thoughts, and so there are no solutions there. So that would be examples of being incoherent. And hopefully by this point in the Peace Project, people are starting to get this sense of like, wow, I finish a meditation and I feel wonderful, and maybe as the day goes on I lose that edge, okay? But with practice, by now that you know what coherence is, that beautiful place within you, then you are able to kind of home, that's like your homing, is that right? Your homing signal that you can kind of bring yourself back home to that.
That's a great way to put it. So, to help yourself be more prepared for incoherence and be able to deal with that and turn it around into coherence. You know, so how do you listen to yourself coherently? How do you listen to others coherently? Right. What are some examples of that? You know,
you just reminded me, one of the things is that we are far too tolerant of being miserable. Okay, we are far too tolerant of being depressed, miserable, cranky, grumpy. And what happens is we almost get marinated in our own kind of negative emotions. So the very first way to become more coherent is to become intolerant of being incoherent. You know, it's no longer acceptable. When you know that you've got skills to lift yourself and to bring yourself into a more resilient state, bring yourself there. This is a little bit different than grieving. Grieving is a very active state. Some very deep processing is going on. I'm not saying ignore your negative feelings. What I'm saying is there's a pivotal point when a negative feeling turns from negative, high impact, positive grieving to self-pity, depression, And when you can catch yourself at that point as soon as possible, then pivoting yourself into this coherent state makes us much more valuable to ourselves, our families, our society, and all of that.
So tell me some more about the practical applications of coherence.
Yeah, well, you know, I always say it's kind of a really tragic thing in life that we spend the time with people we love the most when we're often the most incoherent. right? You know, you come home from a long day of work and, you know, unfortunately you've given your best stuff out into the world. And then we come home and you dealt with traffic on the way home, you're hungry, you're this, you're that. And, you know, now you're facing the person that you love and you can't, you know, you're like, I know I love you, I wrote it down, you know, because you're not feeling any connection to the person because you don't literally have the juice in you to finance those beautiful emotions, right? What is so practical for me with coherence, because I certainly have to practice it many times a day. Life for me is particularly challenging. I'm sure it is for everybody, but I have to rely on these skills quite regularly. And so when I notice that I'm in an incoherent state, then I need to, then I know to recalibrate, and I know to kind of step away from everything for a moment, go within. Recalibrate, reach for a better feeling, and then come back and you know, surprisingly, all of a sudden you come back and your evening will be so much more enjoyable if you took that time to get coherent before you spent time with the people you love the most.
Sounds like it's really just like anything else that is that's good in your life, that you're skillful, right? So the more you do it,
yes,
the better you'll become.
Yes.
The more you practice it. By the way, the more you fail, too, right?
Yep.
But failure breeds success in some ways, so you learn from that. But the bottom line is, the more you do it and the more you put it into practice, the more successful you'll be.
The more you can rely on it. It is your strength. It is your rock. Absolutely.
Which leads into the other aspect that we'd like to talk about, which is resilience.
Yeah.
Right? So you've mentioned that throughout our conversations so far. And so how does resilience relate to sensitivity? Are they mutually exclusive? Right? So if I'm resilient, does that mean that I'm plowing through everything and I'm not being sensitive to anything around me? Monkey mind, right?
Right, right.
I'm focused.
Right, right.
Nothing's distracting me whatsoever. So how does resiliency and sensitivity, how can we balance those?
You know, that's a wonderful point that you're bringing out, because in the coherent state, what's interesting is that your state becomes more stabilized. And because you're more stabilized, you're actually more capable of being kind of permeable and open and empathetic to the people around you. So it's not like, you know, people around you, and if someone's kind of acting out horribly, that you go under. It's actually that you're in a coherent state and someone's kind of acting out in some way, and you're actually able to kind of take that in and maintain an open, resourceful, problem-solving perspective, as opposed to, you know, clutching on to negative emotions, judgment, all of that.
Good stuff. So it dawns on me that it's similar to those buildings that are being built these days in earthquake-prone areas, right? So they're able to sway.
Yes, wonderful metaphor.
And they're not extremely rigid and hard structures, right?
Yes, yes, wonderful that
so
you
they're
brought that out.
resilient?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, like you're saying, if there's an earthquake and a building is rigid, then it's going to break, right? Yep.
So tell me more about how that relates to other aspects of life or other practices, like martial arts, for example.
Yeah. Well, you know, I haven't studied them much at all, but I understand in the martial arts there's this idea that if an opponent comes at you with a certain amount of energy and attack, that if you resist that, you almost make your opponent stronger. If you allow that energy to kind of come in and you work with it and blend with it and send it back, then you have more power. You haven't become weakened so much in the process. So that's essentially what we're doing, is kind of sending the energy back with a gentle hand and using the same energy but in a more skillful, adept way.
Interesting. So resistance doesn't make us resilient and coherent.
Yeah, right,
but
right.
Coherence makes us resilient and helps us use the tools that we have so that we don't even have to resist. Is that accurate?
Yes, and you know, in Numinous we talk a lot about this, you know. So something really, think about this, how many times something really lousy happens in life, and then, you know, it's so horrible, and then like 2 years later you're like, well, gee, it's kind of good that happened, because, you know, all this good stuff came out of it, right? In numerous programs in the Albany Peace Project, everything we're doing is getting you into a state where you don't have to wait those 2 years, right? You're able to kind of take the challenge, take the hit, but you are very quickly able to gather resources to cope and to say, well, instead of falling into self-pity, the question is, what am I going to do about it? And then going into actions, inspired action, hopefully.
So how does coherence increase intuition and problem solving? I think you've talked about before.
Yeah. Well, it increases intuition because our bodies actually register our environment long before we think a thought. So your enteric nervous system, your gut and your heart, they're actually responding to the environment. By the time we think a sentence, it is old news to our nervous system. So the idea that we get quiet and we anchor our mind down into the heart and down into the body, we're able to access information much sooner, which enhances our intuition. So which means that you respond at a deeper level, not just a shallow head level, and you're able to kind of use that intelligence that's a more broader intelligence. In the heart map literature, they refer to this as cortical resonance, that you kind of basically, instead of the thoughts getting aborted in the survival system, what happens is you're able to access the higher thinking centers of more problem solving and executive functioning.
Fascinating.
Good stuff. I mean, you wouldn't want to make a decision without it, basically.
It sounds like more of our leaders should sort of follow this this recipe, right? With
oh my goodness, meetings. When people sit in meetings and they get coherent ahead of time, they are amazed at how much more work and more creative things occur. When you get a bunch of coherent individuals together, magic happens. Yeah. And I have to say, I saw that in the last year. We had this fabulous team working for the Albany Peace Project, and we would practice the meditation often ahead of time, and we had so much fun and just so much problem solving, and I was so grateful and proud and just so happy for all of their input in the entire year. And I would go to Peace Project meetings and I'd be so happy, because who would you want to spend more time with but individuals that are good-hearted, sweet-minded, wanting to help and serve, and we would laugh and have so much fun. So
that's great. So we look forward to having you share more about that with us, and spreading this, right, as far as we can spread it.
Absolutely.
So this is the third session in a series of 4. We did discuss a little bit more about incoherence and how coherence can help us more in our lives, and how that leads to resilience. The next session that we cover, we'll talk about the aspect of service within our lives, and how that actually can help us too.
Yes.
So we look forward to that. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kirk.